So, hello! This is going to be my video about the Ibanez TSA15H head and the matching Ibanez cabinet. So, this is a tube amp with a certain number of controls that I'll go over. One of the interesting things about this head is that it has a 5-watt and 15-watt selector, which I almost always leave in 5-watt mode. And even that can get fairly loud sometimes for a bedroom setting. So yeah, this is an amp for home use. It's really nice for recording. And it's something that I compare to my Fender Blues Jr III, which I just talked about in a video that I made yesterday. And globally speaking, to compare the two, I would say that the Fender Blues Jr III has a lot of kind of upper mids, and so it's nice for like a solo and a mix, but by itself it can get a little bit towards the harsh side. And the Ibanez, on the other hand, can tend to be a little bit on the dull side. Okay, but you have what you need in terms of the controls in order to compensate for that. But so it can be on the dull side in a mix. Because those of you that mix, you may know that often what you're doing when you mix is scooping out a lot of the low mids, or what a novice might call the lows, right, of a guitar. Which means that in fact, this amp by itself, it has a nice full sound, in fact. But often when you place it in a mix, it can sound a little dull. So that's what I mean by sounding dull, because by itself, it doesn't really sound dull. It sounds round and full. So I would say that the tuning of the Blues Jr. is a little bit more sort of pre-mixed, if you will. It's a little bit better adapted to recording and then putting in a full mix, where the Ibanez is better adapted, let's say, for a solo recording. And of course you can use, both of them for either, but I'm just trying to give you an idea of how it sounds. So one of the main features of this amp is that it comes with a tube screamer effect built in. And the tube screamer gives you that sort of, Stevie Ray Vaughan type sound. And if you want to hear what this sounds like, I made a video 2 or 3 days back where I go through sound samples of both my Fender Blues Jr. and the Ibanez TSA15H. Back to back, so that you can compare and contrast what they sound like in different settings. And just like in that video, I'm going to put together some chapter markers so you guys can jump around to different aspects of this amp as you see fit. If you're a little impatient, or if you want to get just to one particular point in the video. So let's start. To start with, we have an on and an off switch, as you might expect. But a nice thing that this has is a standby switch. The standby switch allows you to warm up the amp without giving it access to the speaker. And that's a kind of disadvantage of the Fender Blues Jr. because there's no standby switch, meaning that if you don't have all the volumes down on the Blues Jr. when you start it up, there may be some risk of tube damage or speaker damage because in the first few seconds of operation the tubes are warming up and you're not going to get a normal sound out of it. So this allows you to flip on the power switch, but leave it on standby, and it only takes a few seconds. Or, you know, if you're conservative, you can leave it like that for a minute, go get a coffee or something, and then everything will be ready to go. The tubes will be hot and you'll be ready to play. So the basic operation of this amp just has 3 knobs: bass, treble, and volume. And that's unfortunate because the Blues Jr. has a mid knob. Unfortunately, the EQ on the Fender Blues Jr. is not very good either. You can hear about that in my other video. But it would have been nice if they had added a mid knob. But, you know, there you have it. And as I said, this amp does tend towards the sort of full or dull side, if you will. So as you see, I have the bass rolled off quite a bit and the treble at about, what, 1 o'clock or something. So that's that. And then we have the tube screamer section, which has an overdrive, tone, and level. The overdrive is just the level of saturation. The level allows you to have different overall volumes with your saturation. So, you know, in a natural setting, you guys that have experience with saturation, of course, you know that when you turn up the overdrive all the way to max, which is the highest amount of distortion you can get out of this amp, then that's going to naturally up the volume at the same time. So to compensate, you can turn down the level on the tube screamer section. You also have a tone, which is nice because you don't get a lot of flexibility out of just the bass and the treble, which, of course, the bass, treble, and volume are all working when the tube screamer is on or off. But when you flip the tube screamer on, then you also have this tone knob that you can use to EQ the sound of the amp with, which is nice. And as I said, it is a little bit on the dull side, so I tend to have the tone up this way, which is more towards a trebly type EQ. Where if you turn it back down this way, it's more towards a bass type sound, which I almost never use on this amp. Otherwise it gets too muddy. And there is a boost switch as well on this amp, which I suppose could be nice for solos. Since I mostly use it for recording, I haven't really used the boost switch much, so I don't have much to report on that. Behind here, we have a bunch of different connections, which is nice. So we can either do 1 times 4 ohms, 2 times 8 ohms, 2 times 16 ohms, 1 times 8 ohm, or 1 times 16 ohms. So that's a pretty incredible amount of diversity of connections that you have for this head to go into just about any cabinet you could want. But it is nice and simpler, of course, if you run it through the cab that Ibanez makes that goes along with this head, which is an 8 ohm cab. So you just use the 1 times 8 ohm out, of course. You know, when I talk about how this sounds, I can only tell you really how it sounds through this speaker cab, which obviously makes a nice pair. They were made for each other. So the other thing of note is that there is a effects loop, in quotes, in this head. And I say in quotes because it's not a true effects loop, unfortunately. Why? Because it's an effects loop for the tube screamer only, which kind of sucks. meaning that if you have the tube screamer off, then you can't use the effects loop. Real bummer, huh? Anyway, that is an option, but there's no onboard reverb like there is on the Fender Blues Jr., unfortunately. I think it might have been nicer if they just included a reverb and no cheesy effects loop that only works for the tube screamer. So what would have been really nice is if they had an effects loop on this device that you could use regardless of whether the tube screamer is on or off. But anyway, that's the way it is. At least if you get like a reverb pedal, and it is only a mono effects loop, of course, so if you get a mono reverb pedal, you can use that when the tube screamer is on. And to be honest, when the overdrive of the tube screamer is on minimum, you still get a reasonably clean sound. So that might not be as much of a limitation as you might think, but that's up to you to decide. And like I said, you can decide by listening to the video that I made of sound samples of this amp. Just go to my channel, and a few days before I upload this video that you're listening to right now, there is a video that gives you all kinds of sound samples of what this amp sounds like with single coils and humbuckers and various settings of the tube screamer and various settings without the tube screamer. So I think I'm going to stop the video here. I gave you a walkthrough of all the different knobs, of the advantages and disadvantages. I think it's a nice amp for recording. I think it's also a very nice contrast to my Fender Blues Jr. III. Like I said, the Blues Jr. gives you a nice, with the gain all the way up on the Blues Jr., you get a nice sort of Led Zeppelin Whole Lotta Love type sound, which is pretty cool. And when the gain is higher on the Ibanez, you get a nice kind of Stevie Ray Vaughan type sound, which is kind of cool too, depending on what you want to do. Like I said, I would recommend, if you want to do a lot of solo electric guitar playing, or a sort of electric guitar arrangement where you have this one big sounding guitar and that's sort of the center of your composition, then I think this Ibanez rig is really nice. It's a very pleasant full sound. But if you're into big arrangements where a lot of the lower end on this amp might just be in your way, and you're looking for something that punches through a mix better, in that case I would say that the Fender Blues Jr. III is better. It has less bass presence, and it has a good amount of upper mids, and it cuts in a mix really quite well. And of course, if you have both, it's very nice too, because then you can mix and match, which is what I do here in my little home studio. Right? Or even, as I've done sometimes I record both amps in parallel. I use, I'm going to show you. I should do a video on this. On this I have the Radial Tonebone JX2 Switchbone Pro. And this is a device that allows you to have two outputs with one guitar input and toggle left or right or both at the same time. And so sometimes I use that all together, and when I'm uncertain of what I want to do, or if I know I want a stereo electric guitar recording, then I have both of my tube amps running in parallel at the same time, and then I can do what I want with it. Sometimes I throw one of the amps on the left and one of them on the right, or sometimes I just throw away one of the amps and keep the other one, depending on whether it's a rhythm guitar part or a solo or whatever. So that's a pretty cool setup that I have going on here that might interest some of you. Maybe I'll do a demonstration of that at some point with some sounds. Alright, I think I'm going to end the video here. It's enough of me blabbing on. Look for the show notes down below. In the comments section, I'm going to add chapter markers so you can navigate around this video to the different parts that interest you. And please share and subscribe and comment, and I'm open to your questions. Bye-bye.